this video, we are talking about why God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So this story of Moses rescuing Israelites, it starts in Exodus chapter 5. I do recommend that you read the whole, story, just because I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm not going to go through the whole, plagues and stuff like that, just like the basics. So I do definitely recommend that you actually read it for yourself. So basically, God goes to Moses and says to Moses to lead, including Aaron as well, to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. So Moses goes to Pharaoh, says to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Pharaoh says no. Obviously, he adds other stuff, but again, I'm paraphrasing. So he goes to God. God goes to him and says to go to the children of Israelites and basically say that I am the Lord, etc., etc. Again, read it, just read it. He goes to Israelites, but then they don't really listen, they don't really take in what he said. So he goes to God and says, basically, says the Israelites didn't really take in to what I was saying. So then God says, go back to Pharaoh, but this time turn your staff into a snake. So, well, in a serpent, but snake. Anyway, so he goes to Pharaoh, does the exact same thing, but then Pharaoh accuses him of being a sorcerer. So God basically tells him that Pharaoh's heart has hardened, and he tells him to go to the river and then with your staff hit the river and it will turn into blood and all the fish will die, and then give Aaron your staff, and then Aaron will raise his hands and all the rivers, all the streams in Egypt will turn into blood. So at that point, Pharaoh's heart is still hardened. So Moses releases frogs, and that's when Pharaoh was like, you know what, I will let the people go. So Moses gets rid of the frogs, and then the next morning, Pharaoh then changes his mind. His heart hardens, and it changes his mind. And this circle happens all the way through until we get to the sixth plague. And the sixth plague is when God decides to actually harden Pharaoh's heart. So why did God actually, in the end, just use Pharaoh and harden his heart? So you got to remember, God knows everyone. And at this point, Pharaoh has had five chances, and God knows when people are sincere. And at this point, Pharaoh is only saying yes when he realizes, oh, when he says yes, the plague will go away. But for whatever reason, in his head, he doesn't realise, oh, well, we're just going to do another plague. I don't know if he thinks at this point God's just going to, give up or whatever, but it ends up turning into like a cat and mouse game. So for that reason, God just knew Pharaoh, his heart, he was never going to change. So he thought, you know what, I'm just going to use him. And even if he changed, I gave him five chances. At this point, he didn't care about his people either, because you got to remember as well, the Egyptians were suffering with all these plagues, and he was just like, no. He was so in himself. He was like, no, it's not gonna happen. I don't really care. You're probably thinking, if he can harden Pharaoh's heart, why did he not soften it? So if he softened it, it would have been a whole lot easier. It would have been a whole lot easier. We wouldn't have all these plagues. It would have been easy. It would have ended on the sixth plague, and yeah, that'd be great. They would have come out easily. There wouldn't be the issue with the sea. It's just been perfect. But here's the thing. So if we go back to where Moses tried to explain to the Israelites about the Lord and how he's going to rescue and stuff, they weren't really paying attention. They weren't really taking it in. They didn't really necessarily trust, which, to be fair, I don't blame them at that point. So God wanted to prove to them that he was powerful, that he had all that power, and he did that through the plagues. And then on the other side, you got to remember, in Egypt, they were all worshipping false gods and stuff. So for the Egyptians, he wanted to make it known that he was the only true God. And in the end, it kind of turned into a justifiable punishment as well. Because when it went to the 10th plague, that was when it kind of got a little bit personal. So if you remember from Moses' story, basically, it was ordered that every male would be murdered. Unless she was female, she lived, every male would be murdered. So Moses was saved because his mother didn't want to do that. So she hid him away for 3 months. And when she couldn't hid him anymore, she stuck him in the river. So I feel the 10th plague was more of kind of definitely a punishment to the Egyptians, because what God said to tell Moses was to put the blood on the doors, so when death passes, it won't hit your family, it'll only hit, you know, all the Egyptians, for all the Egyptians male firstborns, and it included Pharaoh's firstborn. So when they were finally let go after the 10th plague, why did God then yet again harden Pharaoh's heart? So at this point, all his people were annoyed. They were literally annoyed. They were saying, "Oh, what have you done? We have no slaves, no one to do our work," that sort of thing. Again, paraphrasing. God then hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and that's when we get that chase to the Great Sea, the splitting of the sea and stuff. So at this point, while he was doing all this, he wanted the Egyptians as well to kind of change their ways, and clearly it didn't work. They were annoyed about what happened. So that's why God then hardened Pharaoh's heart, because he was like, Egyptians at this point, all these ones, and they're not going to change. So that's when, when the Pharaoh and all the slave owners go chasing for Moses, that's why they all drowned, because they were never going to change. And again, it would be a good way for God to then show, the Israelites, how powerful he was and how true he is to his word. So the punishment on the Egyptians was justified, as I said. In the end, they never really changed their thinking or anything like that, and they were worshipping false gods. So in the end, it was a righteous, what do you call them again? A righteous discipline, if that makes any sense. But yeah, that's it for this one. So in the next video in this series, I'm going to be doing the book of Job, which gets a little bit complicated.